One, two, three.
Perfect.
Hello, I'm Kata and welcome to the Walk the Valley, the podcast that breaks down the barriers to bringing healthcare innovation to market. In today's special episode, Will and I take a look at a staggering statistic. 80% of HealthTech startups fail. Why does this happen? What can we learn from these failures? We'll explain the valley of death and why does it exist. We'll also explore the broader issues in digital health, like overhyped adoption, shrinking funding, regulatory hurdles, and why user experience often makes or breaks a product. This is a conversation packed with lessons learned and insights for anyone navigating the valley of death in health tech. Let's go for a walk in the valley.
Will, did you know that the health tech industry has an 80% startup failure rate?
I did. I'm super curious as to why that is, or what are the challenges, and what are the real big dynamics within inside of the industry that are meaning that such a high failure rate is going unnoticed.
I think the reason why we're doing this podcast is to shed light on the most risky period of startup development, especially in the healthcare field. I feel like the term valley of death needs some explanation. People sometimes think that there are multiple valleys of death in the startup development, but I'm not sure I agree with this. What do you think?
Well, I think that there are so many different journeys to commercializing medical health tech products. So there isn't one unique experience on that journey, but there are really just substantial challenges that those companies reach and have to get past to become commercial. So how the companies and the founders describe them and how they experience them, I guess, isn't unique, but the real challenge is that at the top is really just one significant valley of death, right?
Yes. And you pointed out that you need to reach commercialization and start generating revenue. And I think this is the point where you get out of the valley of death. So the most important task in surviving is to prepare for commercialization and prepare the channels to generate revenue so you can become financially sustainable. And in order to achieve that from a product that is in a prototype phase or a proof of concept phase, the journey can be very long and full of ups and downs.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a really important point there, which is really how many startups that are deep in product development and clinical validation really start to think about how would this be sold, how would it be purchased and used in a clinical setting. I think those are two really different mindsets, and pre-commercial startups really only have a particular viewpoint on their growth and their targets and their the things that they need to achieve. And post-commercial companies really certainly just realize that this is upon them, and if they haven't had expertise and knowledge within inside of their team to prepare for that, then it can come as quite a shock. And I think that's really where we see these numbers. Why that is because I think there just isn't a good degree of preparation or competence within inside of teams.
Yeah, it seems it is very important to have a good team. It's not enough to have the scientist and one business person in the team. You need a combination of all sorts of expertise, a real multidisciplinary bunch in order to make this work. what actually helps me to understand the Walk the Valley better is the technology readiness levels. So the technology readiness levels, or TRLs, are a method for estimating the maturity of technology during the development phases. So the first TRL is basic research. Then comes the second. After basic research, you enter the applied research phase and you make a discovery, and this is your proof of concept. And these stages are quite often taken care of by academia and soft funding. This is all concentrated in research. But then you need to validate your technology, your development, make sure that your discovery is actually matching the market needs and can be packaged or shaped into a product that then can be sold. So then you develop further and enter the technology validation level, which means that you go out, test with real patients, or test your discovery in real life. When you move on to the next level, to technology demonstration level, then you test on a larger scale. And when you make your first sale as a feasibility or pilot sale, you enter the sixth level, which is called prototype system. When you show on level 6 that your prototype works within the system, in our case the healthcare system, then you have proof that this could work in other healthcare settings. Therefore, you need to go on and demonstrate within the healthcare system. So you need to sell to more places, more hospitals, in order for them to understand how this fits into their daily operations, into their clinical workflows. And that's when you become really investable. That's when industry comes into the picture. And then you start integrating your product into the system, which is TRL 8. And on this level, you need to face completely different problems, such as the healthcare sales cycles and how you survive between them, or how you scale up. And on level 9, this is the final level where you fully deploy your technology and it's used in the healthcare system in the everyday practice. You may notice that there is a gap between the academic part and the industry part. Between technology readiness level 4 and 6, you are in a gap. And this gap is the valley of death. This is where you need to figure out whether your product works in a clinic. You need to make sure that other clinics are interested in buying your product. You need to figure out what is the way of bringing your product to the clinics and going through the procurement procedures, and have at least one place use your product consistently, so you can show to the industry that your product is viable and you've reached product market fit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think maybe you've highlighted one of the biggest challenges there is that in being able to cross the valley between technology ready level 4 and 6, you are dependent on environments that allow and are cooperative for testing of high risk or potentially complex new technologies. So there's a significant challenge in finding good environments for that. And if we talk about, just for example, some of the sectors, neonatal technologies or these kind of things, which depend on clinical validation or studies from participants, there's a really big hurdle to be able to find the right environment for that to be tested and validated in. It's really not easy.
Yes, that's true. But I also see a huge opportunity here for you to create those partnerships with the healthcare system and channels through which you can adjust and improve your product in order for it to fit properly into the system. Because if you want to disrupt the system, you're going to face a huge wall, a huge reluctance to adapt your technology, because the healthcare system is about 40 years behind the technology development in many instances, and they're moving slowly. Going into the space with the aim to disrupt the healthcare system might be too risky.
It can only really succeed if you have a collaborative approach. I mean, like all product development, you need the end user or the potential customer to have confirmed and validated that that is the solution that they need, right? And if you build within an isolated environment where you're assuming that that is the right solution, regardless of whether it's healthcare, health tech, med tech, biotech, whatever it is, you're going to come out of that product development process not having truly looked at what is the genuine need at the end of it. You're just making an assumption. So if you can't get good spaces for validation here, then it's going to be a very continuous high rate of failure. And we need both the technology level and the political level and all levels to be complicit in understanding that this is something that we need to improve.
Exactly. Even the most successful founders face a lot of obstacles, unfortunately, because there's no standard procedure for this, and the products are also very different in many cases. They all have individual journeys, but sometimes the obstacles are the same. The aim is always to find product market fit so you can sell. And how you can achieve this, there's no recipe for that. However, I think if we go through a lot of stories of founders who are going through the valley of death and ask them about their strategies, in the end we will have a collection of strategies that really work. So what are those challenges? What is the big picture here?
Well, there are lots of different interesting drivers. I mean, we're still in a market that is kind of reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic. We're still operating in an extremely challenging geopolitical environment. We're also still trying to survive in a really complex financial and capital market. So on those levels, there are significant challenges, and beneath that, there are still very common, standard, high-level issues that affect startups, like the operational challenges within inside of an organization. Trying to get connections and integrating with health records, for example, or having the right type of leadership within inside of an organization where you have the ability to navigate internal conflicts and get across the leadership vacuum to bring your product to market, and then always regulatory challenges of bringing a product to market and making sure that it does what it says on the packaging is super important.
Yeah, also the digital transformation of the healthcare system is going at a rather slow rate in many cases, and the regional differences make it even harder to integrate to these systems because while in one region it might be super high tech, in another region they might still be using the fax machine. But you mentioned the regulatory and market shifts, and I think it's also important to mention that every country within the EU, so we have the EU MDR, the medical device regulations, and IVDR, but we also need to look at the reimbursement system early on, because that country by country differs, and it also determines which regulatory pathway you need to take, because if you don't take the right regulatory pathway, you might not fit into a certain country's reimbursement system, you may not be able to get reimbursement from the state, which is a problem because then you don't get paid. Another thing that you need to think about early on is to explore the procurement procedures, because that might affect your journey as well. And in order to do that, you have to talk to procurement departments early on, before your product is ready to go to the market, while you're already testing your product. So by the time you obtain the CE mark and the regulatory approvals and market approvals, you already establish those channels through which you can sell.
So as we go forward and we develop this this series of interviews with brilliant entrepreneurs, particularly in the health tech and medtech space, what are you thinking are the interesting revelations or findings that we will have from this series?
Oh, I think it's a really complex pathway to navigate through the valley of death, and I'm pretty sure that there's no one founder who can think of all of them and address all the obstacles. For example, regulatory compliance, they would start too late and then it will become very costly. And in this stage of development, money and time are very important. So you need to use your funding smartly and complement it with soft funding. And by soft funding, I mean grants. When you apply for a grant, you need to also contribute with your own money for a certain percentage of the budget of a project. Often you need a large clinical trial to prove that your product is fulfilling its intended purpose, it's doing what you're saying it should do. These are very costly procedures. You need to go as far as you can with soft funding in order to demonstrate the value of your product. Once you have that, you still need a chunk of investment to take you to the next level, where you demonstrate that it's compatible with the system. So you're finding your product market fit. So it comes in cycles. First you get your first investment to get you started, then you like crazy need to apply for all soft funding out there and come up with projects to make sure that you keep going and generating the evidence that you need. And then you can get to the second funding round, where you get investment again, and then you need soft funding again to have evidence for your next stage where you start selling. In the meantime, you also need to think of regulatory compliance early on, from the first day of development of your product, and the best way you can do it is just write everything down. Whatever you're doing, every procedure you need to write down just on a Google Doc. And then it will evolve as you go along. But if you do this, you'll save yourself a lot of money for building your quality management system, which is a core part of your regulatory compliance. And another thing is that founders have great ideas which come from their own personal experience, and they create a product which is great, solving a problem, but that problem might not be the same for everyone they want to solve it for. So ignoring using user experience is a huge mistake. Go out and validate your idea. There are certain methods how you do that. So you don't go out and ask them, do you want this product and how much would you pay for it? Because they would tell you something which would not correspond to reality. Because when you want to sell, then they might not say yes to it in the end. Ask them, what are they using now to solve the problem, and what is bothering them, or what could be improved in the current procedures. And then try to shape your product in a way that meets those pain points.
But I think it's quite common for startups of all types to identify a problem, perhaps through their own personal experience or work environment, go out, innovate, plan, develop, and try and commercialize something reasonably from within inside of a bubble of thought of my own experience translates to a wider experience. And it's just so critical that founders have this inbuilt behavior of constantly asking and checking and validating and testing and proving with the individuals who in the end will be the buyers and the users of their products. And without that, then you really don't have a good pathway. And I think it's something that we do quite poorly in the Nordics, particularly, is find environments, whether it's in the corporate environment or the healthcare environment or wherever it is, where startups can get embedded and test and prove. And I think it should be much better. It should be much more ingrained into the culture, because we invest huge amounts of money and time and effort into developing these really, really complex and brilliant innovations. And an 80% failure rate is unacceptable. It's an enormous amount of money and time and good quality product that is not getting there. And it could just be that we're not asking the right questions on that journey. We're not consistently confirming that we are solving the problem that we need to.
Right. You know what else? We're overestimating the adoption.
Correct.
The digital health market during COVID got really overhyped. You could see a lot of investments from 2021. But then after COVID, investments into medical device industry started to fall. They're still higher than pre-COVID. But I think people starting to realize that maybe there's something wrong in the process, something wrong with the system, and becoming a bit more careful into where they put their money.
Yeah. I think like his people with a long experience investing into health tech and med tech and these kind of verticals will understand that it's a very long, high risk journey to bring that to some degree of profitability. And a merger and acquisition probably is the most logical outcome there. I think in COVID we all got a little bit excited about an opportunity to ride a particularly disruptive period in history, and that this would fundamentally change how healthcare was delivered, and all sorts of outcomes from COVID would be so fundamentally disruptive. From an investment perspective, I think not a lot of questions were asked about what is the genuine path to profitability here, what is the genuine commercial application of this. It was more like, I love the disruptive, radical nature of these ideas, and that's fine, like on one level, but it created an enormous bubble, and the speed and velocity at which that bubble burst is quite shocking, and I think that's how we've ended up with this degree of numbers of failures.
Could be. You also brought up the mergers and acquisitions as an exit strategy. So when you are getting your investments in the beginning, you don't really have the big picture. Often founders don't think about the end game, or think about the end game differently. The end game is to sell your product and scale up, and everybody will use it in the end, which is great. But you also need to figure out how you pay back your investors.
Yeah.
How to make them happy. So I would say not planning your exit strategy on time is also an issue. And then you end up with low valuation when you have to sell.
Yeah. And we've seen that happening. I mean, like companies that were valued at 200 plus million a couple of years ago are now having to revalue at just significantly lower rates. And that's also because of overestimated adoption. But it's also due to the lack of enthusiasm in the capital market. There's also finally the lack of a genuine exit plan prepared in advance that leaves you vulnerable to a low value merger or acquisition from a giant corporate that can then shelve your technology or merge it into another department where it disappears, and that isn't a good outcome for anybody in that journey.
Economic downturns can severely impact startups, even the most successful ones, creating financial difficulties and then potential bankruptcies.
Yeah.
And the shifts in the market make us very vulnerable in these uncertain times. And I'm thinking of geopolitical circumstances right now.
Yeah, you have to expect the unexpected, and you have to be extremely resilient to those scenarios. And you have to be, as a startup, you have to be able to navigate those challenges. So we've covered a lot of topics here, and we're hoping that we'll have these conversations with founders themselves who will confirm whether we're right in our assumptions here. And I'm looking forward to talking with more startups about this and validating these challenges, and also hearing about things that we haven't covered here or talked about. Really digging into understanding what does it mean to be navigating the valley of death.
That wraps up today's episode of Walk the Valley. From funding declines to product market fit challenges, it's clear that resilience, adaptability, and deep understanding of both healthcare systems and user needs are key to surviving the valley. Be sure to subscribe for more stories about the tough but rewarding journey through healthcare innovation. If you enjoyed the episode, leave us a review, it makes a big difference. Thank you for joining us. Happy festive seasons, and until next time, keep walking the valley.